Welcome to Sew Very Easy. My name is Laura. Today I'm making these great little drawstring bags, and I'm also making them for a great reason. Be sure to join me where we're going to learn how to make the bags and the reason why I'm making the bags. I'm making and donating these bags to an organization called Beads of Courage. Beads of Courage is an international program that is designed for children and teens living with some serious illnesses. And throughout their treatments, they receive beads. So the beads are sort of like badges of courage. So they call them Beads of Courage. Each child receives a lanyard with some beads to start on, and they get beads every time a treatment or an event happens in their life. So they do end up with a lot of beads. They get this cute little mascot bear and a bag to carry the beads in. And each of those bags have those special labels. This is an international program, but I'm going to be focusing on the Canadian division. I'll put a link in the description because there is a pattern that you're going to be able to follow along to make these bags. You can also get hold of them and they will send you the free labels to go on these bags. And I'll put a link in the description to the form that you get to fill out after the bags are made and you need to ship them back to the head office. All the bags are made the same size, so each child gets the same size bag. So today I'm going to share a couple of tips on how to make these bags quick and easy. Because these bags are going for children and teenagers, I've chosen some fun fabric from Northcott. So there's one line that's called Believe in Magic. Another line I'm using, Shiver Me Whiskers. And of course, we need some construction zone fabric. And with the bag fabric, we're going to need strong ties to hold these bags together. Ribbon will not be strong enough, so we're using parachute cording. And you can get this parachute cord at stores like Michael's. And this is what is recommended because they really do hold up well. So let's start and make these bags. The fabric is cut 13 inches by 10.5 inches. And we are going to need 2 of these for the front and 2 for the inside. Or we can use a long piece for the inside at 20.5 inches by 13.5 inches. And I'll show you both ways we can make those bags with the linings. I will be making more than one bag, so I'm going to make a template. And that way I can just place this down. And I'm using these flexible cutting mats. And you can get these usually at the dollar store. I'll go through the markings that I've made on my template as I go through making the bag. So for the outside of the bag, I need 2 pieces cut 13 inches by 10.5 inches. So I have those 2 pieces for the front. On the right-hand corner, we're going to be able to put one of the logos. And because I'm making more than one, I've cut a hole in the template to make things easier. This little label is going to go 2 inches over and 3.5 inches up. So I've cut out a square the same size as this little label. So now I can just put this template plastic down and I can see where that label is going to go. The label will need to be stitched down, but just to hold it on while I'm stitching, I'm going to put a little glue. I'm using a washable glue stick. I put my template down, I have that hole cut out. I'm just going to put a little bit of glue in the center, and it's not a lot, it's just so that I'm going to be able to hold it down. I can put my little label down, press it for a second, lift that up, and I know it's going to be in the right spot. With that template done once, I won't have to measure all of my fabrics. And I'm just going to hold that on with some pins now. And I'm going to take those to the machine and do a blanket stitch or a zigzag and stitch those labels on. So with my machine set up, I was able to do all of my labels for all 10 bags. From here, I'm going to be able to sew the sides of the bags with a little opening up at the top. Put the fabrics together, right side, and I do make sure that my label is on the top, and that way I can make sure I have it marked right. I need to stitch a little bit at the top, leave an opening, and stitch down. And I've marked the template for those exact measurements. I need to mark a line at 1 3/4 of an inch and a line at 2.5 inches. So I've marked the template with this little notch out. I've done that notch on both sides. I can now lay this template down, and that little cutout is going to give me an area where I can mark. So I will have these 2 lines on this side and put it to the other side and mark my 2 lines. With those lines marked, I haven't had to do any measurement because I've done the measurements on that one template. Pin those edges together. We are using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Backstitch up at that top, come down to your first line and backstitch. Skip this little area here, which is 3/4 of an inch, backstitch and go all the way down to the end and backstitch. So on the top of the bag, we're going to have this little opening on both sides. I like to press my seams flat first because second, we need to open those seams up because this little opening will need to stay opened. So press those seams open on both sides. The next, we get to make our lining. The lining can be done in 2 different ways. We can start with 2 pieces of fabric the same size and sew those seams the same 1/4 inch as the others, but we do not need to leave the opening. The second lining we can do is 1 long piece. So we're going to have that 13 inches, but it's going to be 20.5 inches. Put right sides together and sew that 1 seam a 1/4 inch. Backstitching from the top and backstitching on the bottom. So there's no opening on the lining pieces. Both styles of linings, the seams do need to be pressed out, just like the front. We're going to be able to put the front and the linings together now. I do like to sew as much as I can with the bag front on the outside. That way I can make sure that the tag is in the right spot. We need to have right sides together, so the lining we're going to see the right side of, and it's going to fit inside. The one thing we want to pay attention to is we do not want all the seams together on the sides. The lining seam is going to go through the center of the bag, and both those pieces are going to fit together. I have the center seam at the center of the back of the bag, and it doesn't have to be exact. It's just so that all the seams aren't together along the side. So I now have this tube, and the top layer is going to go together, and my patches down at the bottom. That 1-piece lining and that 2-piece lining needs to be put together the same way. I'm going to put the right side inside so that I have my 2 seams coming into the center of the bag. If we have all the seams on one side, it just gets a little bit bulky. And I'm going to match that top seam. It won't matter if we're doing the 1-piece lining or the 2-piece. What we're looking for are the right sides of the fabric together so we can sew around that top. If you have the convenience of a free arm, this is definitely the time to use it. The first row of stitching is a stitching just to hold these layers together. So it won't matter where we start, we just need to stitch a 1/4 inch all the way around. Be sure to keep the seam flat, and this is the seam where we have the opening. So we want to make sure that that opening is up at the top and go all the way around. And for this entire project, be sure to backstitch those seams to keep them secure. You can do one bag right after another. For this first ironing, we're going to pull both those layers out, and I'm going to iron the seams going in one direction. It won't matter if it's going towards the front of the bag or the back of the bag. We just need all the seams going in one direction. We can now take this and pull those layers together. The lining is now in the bag, and we have the bag front out. Once again, I'm going to work with this label on the top. That pressing has made that edge already come into the right spot for us, because we do need to stitch a couple of rows along the top. The first row of stitching is going to go right along this edge. Make sure that the edge is together and stitch all the way around. We need to do 2 more rows of stitching, and we're going to stitch on each side of that little opening. So we're going to be stitching right along this top and along the bottom. And that's what the elastics are going to help me do. So we need to find where that opening is, move the fabric over. Now this big elastic I can fit on the machine, so I'm going to be able to follow that edge. We won't need to do any measuring The elastic is holding the place for me. And continue going all the way around. Back stitch and secure that one seam. The next row of stitching is going to be right underneath that seam. So I have a second elastic to mark my second edge. Put that needle in place and now adjust that second elastic. The rest is going to be easy. I'm going to be able to follow that elastic edge. And around we go. Marking your machine bed with these two elastics will save you a lot of time because you now do not have to measure over. To do the bottom, we need to have all of the seams flat. Match up the two side seams, those are the ones with the holes, and smooth out the layers and press. Once those are all done, we're going to stitch along the bottom of the bag. We're going to make a French seam. So we do start with the outside of the bag first. We will need to stitch along this edge. The first seam, we're going to stitch all 4 layers together. So we need to make sure that we have all 4 layers and do a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now that that first row of stitching is done, we need to clean off these edges and we want to leave about 1/8 of an inch. Scissors or a rotary cutter will work fine. Now we get to turn that bag so that the wrong side is out and just poke out those corners. Match up that center seam and give the bottom a press. Inside, we will be looking at a little 1/8 inch seam. We want to enclose that seam. So if we do a generous 1/4 inch, we're going to catch all of that seam inside. It is important that this row of stitching catches all of that seam allowance inside, because when it's turned so that the right side is out, we have the bottom of the bag with a nice finish, but the front of the bag also has a nice finish because that seam is tucked inside. I now get to do my final pressing. That French seam for the bottom makes that bottom of the bag very, very strong, and we didn't have to do any hand stitching at all. Each bag is going to need 2 pieces of this parachute cording at 24 inches. Put this through the layers and it's going to go all the way around, past that first opening and come back out the same side that you started. With both those ends coming out that one side, I tie the knot and then give a good tug so you tighten up that knot. The next tie, we're going to start on the opposite side. So it's going to go in, we're going to bypass that second opening and come back out. So both of these ends are going to come outside and tie a knot. When we cut the parachute cord, this end will fray, so we need to seal it. We can seal this end with a little candle. Just take the end and just go over the top of the flame for a second. Give it a second so it cools down. Now we have a secure end to that parachute cord. And that's all there is to make these bags. They're going to be able to keep their beads in there, travel with their little mascot, clinch it up, and carry them to go. If you're making more than one, a template is very helpful. Adding the elastic onto the edge of the machine and doing one right after another, just like factory work, makes them go together quick and easy. The Beads of Courage organization is international, so if it's something you would like to help with, be sure to check out the requirements for your country. It is very important that when those bags are done, that they're shipped out to the head office and not brought to the local hospitals. And by putting it to the head office, they make sure that the bags get to the appropriate places and to the appropriate hands. Beads of Courage is definitely a wonderful way to recognize the courage that the children need to go through. I'll put a link in the description so you can check out the organization, and I'll put a link in so you can get the pattern for the bags. And thank you for joining me today on Sew Very Easy. Feel free to subscribe, and as always, come on back. Let's see what we're sewing next time in the sewing room. Bye for now.